Why is Dr. Goh averse to writing his own memoirs? Why didn't he write his own autobiography like Lee Kuan Yew did?
He just doesn't think too much about himself. In fact, he says he gets a start if he looks in the mirror every day at his own image. There's this story about one of his lieutenants who was asked one day to bring to his office the standard M16 rifle. And then he went into the office, and then Dr. Goh says, strip the gun. And next instruction, separate the high value parts from the not so high value parts. And Ali did that. And then he says, now separate the parts we are making and separate the ones we're not making. And it was so apparent that what we were making were the low value parts. So next question is, why are we just manufacturing the low value parts? Okay? I mean, we don't have the capacity. What resources do you need if you were going to go into the high value parts? It's fine with him from what I understand. If you don't know an answer, but then you say, but Minister, I will go find out the answer. I think what he really, really disliked, what riles him, would be dishonesty.
Today I'm joined by Siok Sun. She's the author of the biography Goh Keng Swee, A Portrait. And a little bit about Dr. Goh Keng Swee. It was that he was Singapore's founding Minister for Defence and Minister of Finance. He's known to be the architect of Singapore's economic miracle, where his contributions include the establishing of EDB, conceptualizing GTC, and the founding of Singapore's first sovereign wealth fund, GIC. As you wrote this book for Dr. Goh Keng Swee, a part of me asks, why is Dr. Goh averse to writing his own memoirs? Why didn't he write his own autobiography like Lee Kuan Yew did?
I guess it's because he's a very humble person. The first time I broached the subject and I said, can I write on you? It's for your grandson, I said, your second grandson. He hardly knows you, 72 years separate, the two of them. And he'd laugh and say, ha, ha, ha. Who is going to read, he said. I said, lots of people. So, and it wasn't false modesty. He just doesn't think too much about himself. In fact, he says he gets a start if he looks in the mirror every day at his own image. And he says he'd stop reading Straits Times because they will keep on featuring him, okay? He doesn't think he's good looking. And he's like, so he stopped reading newspaper. But he is so unself-centered. He doesn't even know what he's eating when he's involved in a conversation. He is not conscious of himself. Okay?
So in that sense, he didn't think there was a need to write a biography of himself or to write about his own life or his contributions, mainly because he thought, oh, there's nothing much to say about it.
I think he just thinks that he's done what he's done. When he retired, someone interviewed him and he said, look, I am very privileged, very lucky to have all these opportunities to be, he doesn't even use the word to serve the people, to have all these opportunities to do my work. And that's it. He says, hope that I'm now looking forward to a life of retirement.
I know there is the aspect of his second grandson, but also at the same time, like, why do you feel that there was a need to capture this for the public?
Actually, the impetus came from my son. Came back from school, primary school, and he asked me, is Akong an important person? I say, sure, he's your Akong, therefore he is important. I say, why do you ask? He says, I went to the bird park and then my friends pointed out to me, hey, there's this plaque that says it's opened by your grandfather. Then I went to the zoo and there's another plaque again. And then, so I said, okay, you really don't know too much about this grandfather. Tell you what, one day I shall do something and tell you the story. So it was meant to be a family album. Started collecting photographs, etc. And then my friend says, you can't just let it be an unpublished family album. You've really got to expand on it. And that's how I thought, maybe the first, there's never, until I wrote the book, there was none on him. So I thought perhaps the first one should be from a member of the family. And then it would not be an academic book. I'm no academic. I'm not qualified. But I thought I would try and do a loving portrait, and the rest I leave it to others who can either do a more academic book or do a graphic novel. And guess what? There's already a graphic novel on Dr. Goh. So I'm happy that at least there is something to start people thinking about. There are lots of stories to be told, and they can be part of it by being a graphic artist or a storyteller or a writer.
You called the book a portrait. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the process behind the book, meaning how you approach the book and why you titled it a portrait.
A portrait is like a snapshot, better than a snapshot. A photo is just a snapshot of that person. A portrait, you pick up your subject and you add brushstrokes and layer upon layer. And I never worked for the person, but others worked for him. So I thought about it. I could interview those people who worked for him and find out how they feel about it. And so the research into this book was wonderful. The writing is not so wonderful, especially when your publisher cracks the whip and say you have a deadline. But luckily, because for me, being daughter-in-law, only one or two persons said no, they'd rather not be interviewed by me. Most of them were quite forthcoming. So I had lovely stories, and sometimes I said, well, this person worked for him in this capacity. I do not know whether I'm going to get much from this person. And lo and behold, you can't make assumptions like that. It could have been one of the best interviews I had, and the person gave me leads. Go interview this person, go interview that person. So the process was to get more and more information. Then you have to corroborate, because people are fuzzy about the dates, and you know at the back of the mind, it cannot happen in this year. So you check, you do fact checking, okay? Then you check with people too. Go back to them and say, you said it was, and I think it may be another incident. So you have to corroborate. And at some point in time, you have to sit down and write. And I didn't use the word processor. I'm a hard copy. I like to write out in my fountain pen. So I started writing, and editing. Some people don't need to edit. I do edit. And I told myself there are days, there are months even when you lay off because something interferes with your writing. Some days you are inspired and you can write pages and pages. And then at some point in time I said, I better go and talk to a publisher, and probably regretted it. It took me 8 long years with long hiatus in between. But what I want to share is that at some point in time, it cannot just be in your head. You just cannot have the book in your head. You have to start putting pen on paper and write and work from there.
You wrote the first biography of him, and I think in a sense of you being his daughter-in-law, you had access to way more insights that people could back then. I think back then, a lot of data maybe was kept within the archives. There wasn't an internet that we could refer to back then. So the fact that you went through this painstaking work to come out of this, and after reading it, I say I really enjoy it. Although it was published in 2007, I find it to be a wealth, a gold mine that continues to be mined. What do you learn about Dr. Goh that you previously didn't know, even as his daughter-in-law?
I guess I was trying to grapple with what all of them said. He thinks differently. I was trying to grapple with his mind, okay? You know that he's an extraordinary person, highly intellectual, and everybody says he thinks differently. But I said, give me an example. Give me an example. For example, I think there's this story about one of his lieutenants who was asked one day to bring to his office the standard M16 rifle. And of course, he brought the call from the secretary was, Dr. Goh wants you to come and see him and bring an M16. Of course, the security guard at the office was most suspicious, okay? Anyway, and then he went into the office, and then Dr. Goh says, strip, okay? Strip the gun. And next instruction, separate the high-value parts from the not-so-high-value parts. And Lai did that. And then he says, now separate the parts we are making. That would be Singapore Technologies. The precursor was Sheng Yi. And separate that the ones we're not making. And it was so apparent that what we were making were the low-value parts. So next question is, why are we just manufacturing the low-value parts? Okay? I mean, we don't have the capacity. What resources do you need if you were going to go into the high-value parts? It's fine with him from what I understand, if you don't know an answer, but then you say, Minister, I will go find out the answer. I think what he really, really disliked, what riles him, would be dishonesty. So I think he will go mad if someone was deliberately dishonest. So he can take, he wants assessments. He assumed that if you are in a particular position, male or female, you must have been there for a particular reason. He wants to hear you out. There was somebody in education who wanted to digitalize the records and asked for money, timidly asked for $500,000, and he says, $500,000, you can't do that with $500,000. I'll give you $2 million to start with. Okay, so this, I'm still grappling with how did he have such an extraordinary mind, such curiosity? Maybe his background, his childhood may give you some hints of it. Okay, he must have been curious as a child. He grew up in a rubber plantation near the Gap, and roaming with the rubber tappers and curious about how rubber is made, etc. Taught himself how to play the accordion, and asked himself, and this is in his oral history, he has given 42 reels of his oral history, this 8-inch reels, with the archives, in which he started the oral history department. He said, in fact, I think he told it to me personally, not many people are able to write, but they can tell stories. So maybe since we need these stories as records, maybe they could be interviewed. And he started the oral history department, and he said he better be the best example. So he talked for hours and hours. There are 44 these reels, and it has been transcribed. And he talked about his childhood, and he asked himself early in life, I don't know at what age, why am I in this world? Okay, he was curious. So he read, and he is a voracious reader. He also took speed reading lessons so that he could pick up what is important. He read Bertrand Russell, he read lots of books, okay. I think he really believed that books are the store of knowledge. He also believed that whatever we want to do as a nation has been done by civilizations before. There's nothing new, actually. We are short of water. Holland is also short of water. So there are people who have gone through all these trying circumstances. Don't reinvent the wheel. Let's see what we can do. And if we have to tweak, we will tweak. So his mind is always thinking. I think it never stopped thinking. Someone told me that he went to Dr. Goh's office, and Dr. Goh has taken apart his camera. He was an avid photographer, okay? He prefers to be behind the camera. He hates to be in front of the camera. Dr. Goh had taken apart the camera and had been reading convex, concave, in trying to understand how does a camera take an image. So it's a continuous curiosity and searching for answers. And the answers, I think he knows, can come from anywhere.
as I was reading your biography and also his intellectual biography in lieu of ideology, one of the things that struck me was that he was one of the first actual true-blooded social scientists in Singapore, and that brought data, economic data and empirical evidence into decolonization politics, which means that I think if you look across Southeast Asia, a lot of the independence movements, you had very strong rhetoric, which was very common across the board, but not everyone had that data to back up their what they shared, and the data gave a clear picture of what a family or a household in Singapore looked like, and that kind of added color to the picture, a very robust color to the picture as to why Singapore needed to be decolonized. You highlighted in your book this example of his study when he was in LSE, where he had to interview Singaporean households on their national income. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What did he do that was quite unique that maybe other people weren't doing in Southeast Asia?
Data is important. I think reality is important. He would have been an academic and a darn good one if he had his brothers, okay? So he did the first social survey of Singapore. I think to also understand Dr. Goh, his working life as a civil servant, always with social welfare, his main concern is the betterment of the standards of living. It is their entitlement. Every citizen must achieve a higher and higher standard of living. For that, you need data. So he did the first social survey of Singapore in Singapore. This wasn't in his London days. And he ate with the trishaw drivers. My mother-in-law told me that. He actually did the surveys. He must have divided into teams. I don't know how many people he had. But he actually was part of the survey. You know, he was he was a very hands-on person. And he realized how poor they are, okay? I mean, the poverty, you have to read his oral history or the oral history of Mr. Lim Kim San to realize, and his constituency was Telok Ayer, Chinatown. I mean, a very poor district in which people don't just share a property, they share a room. And there was one person who shared a bed, okay? So someone had a day job, someone had a night job. So it's extreme poverty. And I particularly like this photograph of Meet the People session in those days, where you see a very engrossed minister with a frown on his face. And there is this constituent of his, a female, barefoot. She puts her leg on the bench, very comfortable, talking to the minister. There's an interpreter. The background says that this is about the year stateless people must register if they want to be a citizen. But those were the days when the minister, those who govern and those who are governed are just so close together. And he realized he was not even happy with his results, I surmise, of his first survey. So when he went to LSE, this was his first degree. He already had a degree from Raffles College. He chose statistics. He wanted to hone his skills in statistics, what statistics tell you, and how to do better surveys. Okay, and to do that, you have to read a lot, and already he's politically aware, and so he's also very exam smart. He once told me, if you want to do a PhD, you better choose a subject that is, one, original, secondly, very manageable. Okay. You don't want to kill yourself over it. So since he has other interests, he chose a subject, an alternative way of measuring income, which he knew he could complete in months, so that he could, on one instance, did some work for Lee Kuan Yew, political work, whilst he was in London. On the other hand, he was spending all his time at LSE's library, I was told, okay? He just read and read and read. And in his oral history, he said, what would I have done differently if I didn't go into politics? I would like to study what happened in South America at the turn of the century. He said, South America had the highest GDP, okay, in a certain period of time. And he tried to correlate it, and he said, at that period, almost all those countries were governed by oligarchs. Is there a relationship between oligarchy as a form of government and fast economic growth. He wanted to do that because he has a theory. He wanted to confirm it. And then he laughed and said, but I'm too old and I have to be able to read Spanish, okay? Because he's an academic. Primary sources are in Spanish. But you see, his interest is even outside of the borders of Singapore. The world is his interest. Yeah. The human being is his interest. He sees this person, the sentry that makes him every time he passes, and he asks himself, how does he feel? He does nothing else but stand on guard for hours. So he asked the psychologists in the army, why don't you do case studies for me? Why don't you and publish it? So Youth in the Army was published. I think they had 5 case studies. So the human, the humble sentry, he's curious about his mind. I guess he wanted to give more meaningful work to the sentry, and he was curious what kind of mind will accept sentry duty and what can he do about it.
You mentioned a little bit about his time in London where he was juggling his PhD and at the same time contributing to the early formation of the PAP. Can you share a little bit more about why or what did Dr. Goh bring to the table that maybe others in the PAP needed?
He brought himself, he brought his intellect, he brought his political courage. He owes nobody a living. He is prepared to speak his mind. And that is, I think, his value. His political awakening happened when he was in London. In 1948, he went to Hungary, Budapest, with a small group of people. This was when Hungary was very successful in democratizing itself, and there was many delegations from Southeast Asia who participated in this big movement. They went around the stadium and holding banners, At that time, Singapore was part of Malaya. And the rest of the team went there because it's a junket, okay? You go behind the Iron Curtain. They were partying. But one of my interviewees said Dr. Goh was very quiet. He was sitting with Dr. Goh in Budapest, and he said, when we go home, we must start a party. He meant a political party. The vibrancy, the optimism of the youth in Budapest, the promise of a better life struck him. And back home, they were all moaning about going to be a civil servant, lowly paid, subject to British lords who probably not as intelligent as they are. That's how they believe it. And why can't we be in charge of our future? Okay, so I think that was his driving force, but that was the driving force of that team anyway. He was the only economist in the cabinet, I believe. So I guess they all look up to him, and when it came to things, if he can back it up with justification, they would leave it to him to do that. So what did he bring to the table? Himself, his way of thinking, his political courage, and there are times in which he agreed with him. He's the one person who said, "Oh, I'm wrong." He's prepared to accept that I'm wrong. You're probably right. Go ahead. Okay, you have to convince him, and if he's convinced, he will support you. And not only was he good at policy making, he was very good in enforcing. It's no point making policies if you cannot enforce them. He went down to the last detail. He has a little book, okay, and he will note down, okay, when to call somebody after a reasonable time, and he's quite impatient. He will call up the person and say, the project we talked about, did you hit any snag? What can I do? Okay, and extremely, extremely hands-on, creating problems for permanent secretaries, because if he's going to give an assignment to a particular person, he will bypass the permanent secretary. He will call, friends of mine said they were called up to his office and they had to inform their permanent secretary, Dr. Goh's given me these tasks, because he feels that if you are going to do it, I need to brief you. You must understand why I want you to do this project. Nobody better than me. And I do not know why he doesn't include his permanent secretary. So he is extremely, extremely hands-on. He leave nothing to chance, and brings with it also his own care for people. He would make sure that, for example, we persuaded Chu Hui, the first conductor of the SSO, to come and live in Singapore from Athens. And Chu Hui was concerned about schooling for his boys. He made sure that the boys went to Singapore schools. When he next met Mrs. Chu Hui, he will ask, and how are they doing? So it's not, he doesn't skim over social niceties. In fact, they were not social niceties. He was very concerned about the happiness and well-being of everybody.
You said that he read a lot of history and economics. And actually, even Lee Kuan Yew quoted, I think in his eulogy, he shared about how he was someone that read widely, right? And from my understanding was that was why he was chosen as the first Minister of Defense, because he could essentially grasp the problem really quickly, and he could go from zero as an economist to building up essentially a functional army within a few years. And I wanted to ask a little bit about what you think his understanding of history and economics informed his decision-making as a leader. Because I know that it was his immersion in history, for example, that helped him formulate this principle that, there are other civilizations that have solved these problems and we should just kind of learn from them and follow them. What else do you think, in terms of his background, informed the way he approached policy making?
I think because he has such a fine mind, he starts with a hypothesis. He thinks it could be that this is so, and then he tries to get data to prove that. But that A stage, how did that hypothesis even get into his mind? I don't know. I can assume that he is a very good observer of people. Yeah, what motivates the human being? You see in all his policies there are incentives, to motivate human actions. He loves to watch documentaries on animals, National Geographic and others. That's, if he watches TV, that's it. It's almost, I wonder, it fascinates him. Okay, how lions will kill, etc. Some of them quite morbid, and he has a fish. He has a fish tank in his home. Okay, he loves to observe the fishes there. Okay, so he's curious about animals and fishes and behavior. Okay, so I think that informed him. When he reads something of interest, he said, I pass to Harry and I tell Harry, read this, and Harry says, I have no time. But he says, I think you should read this. In fact, on CPF, he credits in his oral history that CPF wasn't his idea. As I told you, he gives credit where it's due. It was Harry Lee's idea, because he told Harry, wages will go up. This is trajectory for our economy. And Harry says, then you better think of a vehicle to soak up excess high salaries into savings. He read a lot. He will try and test it. He loves experimenting. After a while, he felt that in the army, they are all getting very complacent. So he told his chief librarian, I could slip in the national estimates into a memo from me, and nobody would be the wiser. They are not reading all my circulars. So he decided he would conduct an experiment, the child in him. So he just quoted about the flood, and memo is from Defense Minister. Just quoted it, and it came to pass. God said to Noah, gather the animals 2 by 2, and it came to pass 40 days and 40 nights, it rained, etc., etc. And then he just waiting to see what is the reaction. most people were befuddled, and if you are a superior, you just send it to your underling and say, for your necessary action, okay? Or you just file away, okay? The army said, someone in the army said, I think minister wants us 40 days from now to send 2 representatives from each company and meet in this quadrangle, meet at the assembly point, okay? They're trying to interpret what the memo says. And the one smart army person said, 40 days, 40 nights. And there's this big ship. This is for the Navy. Send it to the Navy. Let them deal with it. Only one person was so incensed at this nonsense, he marched into Dr. Goh's office and said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, okay? This is a prank, okay? I never could get the name of that person. I am quite sure he was promoted, okay? And Dr. Goh must have laughed and said, I told you so, okay? So he experimented. It's for his own personal amusement, but he was right. People were not using their minds when they were reading, okay? So this is one experiment I know, but he must have done lots and lots and lots of experiments.
Yeah, and that's the first prank by a minister, I suppose, in recorded history at least. And going back to the military, I thought what would be interesting to kind of explore is the genesis of the military. In the book, you explain how after separation, we had to start with the Ministry of the Interior and Defense, and we essentially had to build a military from the ground up. That's quite a difficult thing to do. I think back then there were a few headwinds, right? One was that we just didn't have the expertise to build a military because primarily we were protected by the British. I think the second was what you alluded to in your book, is that there was no culture of militarism within the majority Chinese population, in the sense that meant for a country that was primarily driven by commerce, people were just allergic to joining the military. And I think the third part was that, back then, the national identities between Singapore and Malaysia were not clear. So a lot of the soldiers in SIR were actually Malays, and you documented that actually a lot of them did leave and go back to Malaysia. So essentially we had this wicked problem at the start where we had to fend for ourselves. And you shared that Dr. Goh volunteered for that position to be the Minister of Defense. So can you share a little bit about what was his approach towards solving this problem? How did he get us started with the SAF?
Dr. Goh plays chess and was a very good chess player. That's important. In chess, you anticipate many moves ahead. He must know that at some point, one day, fortunately, we can be masters of our own destiny. He went to Israel and went to a kibbutz. It was difficult to get to Israel in those days. David Marshall helped him. And there's no record of what he did there, but I think what he saw, he brought back with him. He knew that these were very dedicated, hardworking people. So when I asked him, I said, you are not a military strategist. How did you start doing what you have to do on day one? And he says, well, as in life, get good advice. He already knew that he would, at some point in time, get the Israelis. The British would love to stay on forever. That's not what he wants. You want a clear break. The American defense would love to come and send hordes of people. He asked the first Israeli advisor who came to see him, and how large would your team be? And Azahari said, 7. He says, what? Is that all? But that was it. They only needed 7 people. Okay? And there's a lovely anecdote about this from the early advisors. It was supposed to be a 1-hour meeting with Dr. Goh, but what was discussed at a 1 hour meeting became 4 hours. The British High Commissioner was waiting outside, and the secretary kept on coming in and said, Dr. Goh, so and so is waiting outside. And he says, later. In the end, he says, send him home. And from that particular Israeli advisor who has since died, he said, Dr. Goh told him, this is what I want done, etc., etc., etc. And he says, Dr. Goh, what you're proposing is, what are you trying to do? You want me to train some schoolboys how to tackle football, on a football field? Are you serious? What you're asking me to do is, we don't have much money, we can only do this. He says, I think you should do A, B, and C. And that will require resources. And that was something that struck Dr. Goh, and he probably said, proceed. Okay? But it's not without a lot of problems, because whilst the Israeli advisors were supposed to be Mexicans, everybody knew where they came from. And there was an incident which was reported in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, in which there was almost a near mutiny, because the Israeli advisor said, you're going to go into a dark room, it's live bullets, and the man says, we know where you're coming from, okay? You're from Israel, you're fighting a war there, we're in Singapore, okay? We're not at war with anybody. They almost mutinied. So the Israeli advisor, he told me he had to bring it up to Dr. Goh. He doesn't know what to do, okay? And I don't know what it was that Dr. Goh spoke. He met those men, the men who tried to mutiny, okay? And he must have told them a very convincing story, because national service continued, okay? And he would have checked and counter-checked and make sure that things were on target. And he also understood the human mind. So when we bought our first tanks from Israel, they were all lined up for him to inspect. I mean, he's very hands-on. He wanted to go inside a tank, okay? And they showed him tank number 1. Dr. Goh continued walking, and he went to tank number 5, because he knew tank number 1 had been spruced up for him. They can answer all his questions, okay? Tank number 5 had instructions in Hebrew on the equivalent of the cockpit, okay? You see, he knew what his officers were up to. He just chose to do something different. He's always trying to think the best data is the random data, not the one that's been prepared for you. So he was a very, very hands-on defense minister. One advisor who taught our guys how to fly, he wanted to be on a fighter jet. Can you imagine? He didn't even know what was involved in being on a fighter jet, okay? And then when it took off, okay, the advisor told me, Dr. Goh, that purple and pale, he got very, very sick with the G-force. But that's it. He wants to understand what it means to be a fighter pilot. What is the vision that a fighter pilot will have? Okay, what are the circumstances when you fly? So it's quite incredible how very involved he wants to be. It's almost as though unless he's involved in a problem, you cannot be offering solutions.
When you share about that 1 hour meeting that turned into a 3 hour, I think was the discussion of forming a cadet school, if I'm not wrong, because he was very against it at the start. Why was he against it, and how did he change his mind around it?
He knows we have no time, but Israeli advisor says you have first to train your officers. It's your officers who are going to train the rest. That takes 2 years. Okay, you have to start your school first, and this person, we have no. Dr. Goh says we don't have space. Where can we go and start a school? And that which became Safti, and the Israeli advisor said, "But I know he did a recce. The first thing he did when he came to Singapore, he wanted a map of the island. There was none. He went to the petrol station. Okay, in those days, petrol station had maps. Okay, and then he hopped into a taxi, yeah, because he wants to do things quietly. He surveyed Singapore. He even told Dr. Goh where Safti could be, okay, and Dr. Goh was convinced by people who have done it. They've done it. That even the shortest time you need for an army is a minimum of X number of months. So training the officers was very, very important. And then they will then train the men. There are certain things that there is no shortcut. So they're all incognito, right? The Israeli advisors. Just before, I think 67 was the first batch of 67, 68, around there was the first batch of cadet officers. He told them at Army Day, he told the Israeli officers to turn up in their army uniform, and they knew something was up. They had to fly the army uniform back home to Singapore. So something official, there could be an official announcement. Basically, Dr. Goh, it was after the 6-day war, and Dr. Goh basically said, for the first time, revealed that behind me, this is our army, and this is our military. Behind me are the people who have been advising us. Okay, so I asked him, Pa, what if Israel did not win the 6-day war? He said, then we will be in deep trouble.
Yeah, so at where Safti would be, which was Jurong, he also had another effort in Jurong as well, which was what we call the Jurong Industrial Estate today. It was back then known as Goh's Folly. You highlighted that there was a mistake that people thought, because they were thinking, oh, Singapore, you're a entrepreneur. Why would you, actually think about going into industrialization? And at the same time, you had this cold start problem, meaning that, since there's no one there at the start to invest in you, future investors are not keen to invest. So how did he solve that problem? How did he actually attract investment to Singapore in the early years?
By a bit of skullduggery, I think. Mind you, he was advised by Win Samias, another important advisor. And it was a gut feel, okay? A gut feel that he could turn swampland that was feasible, okay? But how are you going to attract industries there unless you build houses, okay? And so what he did was, he had a very good person advising him at JTC, Woon Wah Siang at that time. They have to, there are a whole host of problems once you want to start industrialization. You could impose tolls, make it punitive for people not to go there. You could make it attractive for people to be there. So mind you, don't forget, apart from building houses, he already had in mind the Jurong Gardens, because if you want people to go there, you must have social amenities, and Jurong was so way out. There were also a lot of strikes. Singapore businessmen were skeptical, sitting on the fence, not sure whether Singapore could turn communist, not sure, we've just separated from Malaysia, how can we do it alone? So you need a steel mill, okay? So no Singapore entrepreneurs was foolhardy enough to invest in a steel mill, except 3 Indonesians, one of them my father, and 2 others from Sumatra. I always say 3 Indonesians who know nothing better. They were the pioneers of National Iron and Steel Mill. So he knew what you need, the basics that you need. You need a steel mill, you need X amount of investments and social amenities, etc., etc. I guess he also realized the value of publicity. It was although he doesn't want to look at himself in the mirror, he knew that he, as the finance minister, must show that there were a lot of foreign investors coming in. And he actually, again, did his experiment, his trick, remembering the story of Shin Sawang and how with only limited army, he made this emperor made the same army go up and down the ramparts, giving the barbarians the feeling that he's got a huge army. So he told his EDB officers and said, I want to open a factory every week. That was impossible. But Dr. Goh said so. He wants to be in the news every week, if not every other day. So they then came up with this genuine, ingenious plan. All right, even though someone is vaguely interested in signing an MOU, the day of MOU is a signing, okay, of the memorandum of understanding. So the RTC in those days will zoom in, and the minister is always seen cutting ribbons, okay. The day then you've chosen your side, you can a ribbon cutting, okay, and then when it's ready, almost ready, topping up ceremony, there's a third event, and then of course when it is already operating, you invite the press, etc. So he was in the news, and if you look at news coverage, Dr. Goh, not some Lee Kuan Yew must have been also in the news, but it was ad nauseum, okay. Dr. Goh was opening, one factory after another, and it is to give the illusion that we have far more foreign investments than we actually have. That's how clever he is.
How he even convinced the first few to come in?
Oh, EDB was so happy when the salted. This is the ingenuity of the EDB officers, okay? When the first salted egg manufacturer wanted to come, we had low tech, okay, to Singapore. They laid out the red carpet, okay? And I guess success begets success. There was even a wig making factory. My Fair Lady was the name of the wig making factory. Anybody who wants to invest in Singapore, they'll lay open the red carpet, and they would give them a tax exemption for the first 5 years, etc., etc., etc. They were just so happy. I've talked to ADB officers before. That pioneer batch were united by this. Everybody celebrate. Whenever there's a new investor. It's they were also caught up in this nation building. Okay, and I guess we were partly lucky. Okay, and also very hardworking. And success begets success. Then we had the high, but he wanted the high value ones. Rollet, okay, Shell, okay, and they came. Partly, if you read Win Samia's oral history, Win Samia said that they felt that politically that it was stable. Investors won't come unless there's political stability, and that they did their own pros and cons, and they felt that Singaporeans could tell it's a convincing story. It was a compelling story that we told investors, and I think everybody worked hard towards that narrative.
I wanted to ask a little more about Dr. Goh and Lee Kuan Yew, because these two men were fundamental in creating, and alongside S. Rajaratnam, were fundamental in creating the environment, the stable environment that you spoke of. How did their early dynamics shape out to eventually form the PAP?
Well, Dr. Goh actually knew Madam Kwa Geok Choo better than he knew Lee Kuan Yew in the beginning. He went to school, ACS, in the same bus as Madam Kwa Geok Choo. And when he was in London, he and Madam Kwa continued their letter writing to each other. And Madam Kwa would inform him of the political developments in Singapore. Don't forget, Dr. Goh wasn't in Singapore at the formation of the PAP. He was in London studying. He knew Harry Lee, as he's known as Harry with the cabinet, better in his London days. Lee Kuan Yew came much later and studied law at Cambridge. I guess Lee Kuan Yew must have seen something in this man, okay, for him to include Dr. Goh, Dr. Toh Chin Chai, Lim Kim San, and the rest. Okay, they were all chosen for their Rajaratnam, for their for specific reasons. Dr. Goh was very single-minded in the sense that there were things that didn't interest him, which the cabinet may have discussed, and on those things he would not be really engrossed. He was very single-minded in the task that he was given. I guess he would persuade his colleagues, because I see that in him. He believed in persuasion. So there must be there had to have this. There has to be discussions in cabinet, after which you would, if there's nobody takes notes in those days. But I think you can have he would have got a sense of if somebody is vehemently against something, he would try and convince that person or delay it. Okay, he's not someone who will bulldoze over his colleagues. So I think fortuitously they all seem to work, to have their own specialization, and seems to be working in tandem. And there were huge challenges, so you have no time to go into petty squabbles. I don't know whether I've answered your question. For Dr. Goh, he would speak inconvenient truths, whether it's to Harry or Raja. But I think there was Harry is primus inter pares. I think there was a genuine collegiate atmosphere in the cabinet in those days. But his relationship with with LKY is not like his relationship with Lim Kim San, with whom he went to Raffles College, and then you are buddy, So and you drink together, and so it's not. I would say it's not at that kind of level.
And how do you think their thinking influenced each other? Because you shared a little bit about how he was willing to stand up to LKY when he had contrary positions. And even in his letter of appreciation to Dr. Goh, he did say that, and I quote, he said, "Your biggest contribution to me personally was that you stood up to me whenever you held the contrary view. You challenged my decision and forced me to re-examine the premises on which they were made. Thus, we reached better decisions. The benign tension made our relationship healthy and fruitful." So, do you see any of how maybe Lee Kuan Yew thought about things influenced Dr. Goh?
I think so. I think the two must be in cahoots at sometimes. If you read the GIC story, there is an anecdote about the Sterling crisis, in which Lee Kuan Yew and Dr. Goh seem to be taking opposing points of view. But I think it was a pakat. I think read it. They could be playing. They could be posturing. Okay, one is a bad guy, one is a good guy. So I mean, Dr. Goh respected LKY, and he respected that LKY has a very fine mind. Really believed that he should read certain articles. He will just highlight it. And for some strange reason, Dr. Goh lent a book I had. It's a biography of Nasser. For some reason, I don't know how I handed the book to Dr. Goh, and he passed it to Harry. He told me I passed it to Harry. Harry had a very good read. Apparently, Harry was fascinated by that particular book because of the insights on Nasser. I think that book talked about how his childhood affected his political leanings, and I got the book back. So I'm sure it's based on mutual respect. But Dr. Goh was a civil servant before. I think he respects hierarchy. Okay, he knows the responsibilities of a prime minister. He was thus a deputy prime minister. If the prime minister says no, then so be it. We've seen him many times shrugging his shoulders. He doesn't angst about it, If what he wants, unless it's very, very important, somebody disagrees, let it go. I mean, that's the man. What's the point of that? Far more important issues than to angst about it and go against LKY. He's a prime minister. If he thinks, and this is a small matter, let it be. I think he would let LKY have his way.
You mentioned GIC just now, and I thought it was interesting because in 1980, Goh Keng Swee returned to MAS to assess the agency's development, especially after, I think, the spades of international shocks in the 1970s. You had the oil crisis, you had the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, and the global increase of unemployment across the globe. You highlighted in your biography that there were sweeping reforms that were done in 1980. I think there were a lot of staff that left MAS during that period of time. What surprised me actually was that within Dr. Goh going in 1980, within about a year or so, GIC was born. And what shocked me was really just how fast he arrived at that conclusion. So within 7 months, he announced that there was going to be a government investment company. And part of me wonders, and now obviously with the hindsight bias, you can say, oh, that was the right decision to make. But back then it wasn't clear, because back then you could argue that we could have taken a different path, maybe embed or train up investments department within MAS itself, maybe like what the Scandinavians did. So what I wanted to ask was, when he went into MAS, why did he think that having GIC was the right call to make?
Partly a hunch. Yeah, he's always working on hunches. When he started MAS, he know you need advisors as usual, okay? But you also need to train your people, what we always call transfer of technology. He would have Monday morning meetings with his top MAS officers, and he would tell them, predict where interest rate will be or gold price, okay? Everybody write down, yeah, in a piece of paper and give it to him, their prediction. And next Monday morning, they come and they open up and they find out who is wrong, who is furthest away from actuality. Not to belittle anybody. It was no right or wrong, but to then discuss why did you think it will go up? Now it's gone down. What happened? So it is to train for himself to learn, as well as to train his officers. And I think the years later, he discovered or he felt, he must have talked to some international advisors as well, that that MAS was investing in longer term than necessary, that you could take off a certain part of your reserves and trade, and you can get better returns from short-term trading, that it was too long on long bonds, basically. And he also felt that perhaps it's too much for MAS. It probably may need to hive off investments, to GIC. And he could, as I told you, he's a chess player. He'd planned this all along. It's a question of when he decides to enforce it and when he announces it. So one of the early advisors was Rothschild. Now, he knew the Rothschild chairman. So I spoke to the former chairman, and Rothschild was one of several that had to make presentations to him. Okay, he shortlisted the advisors, and then he made sure that Harry would also meet up. Harry probably just met up only with Rothschilds, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe one other. Okay, and he made sure that Harry was comfortable. And this chairman of Rothschild said it was such a grueling session with LKY. It was almost like having his tooth pulled without anesthetics. Okay, but he knew that meeting Harry was the papal blessing. After that, once, and if it went well, then Dr. Goh would have chosen Rothschilds, as he did. So they went to Raffles Long Bar to celebrate. So it was all, it seemed fast. This man is impatient, but he had already had his plans all laid out. It's just a question of enforcing. And if someone is deemed to be an obstacle, he would get rid of them. He believes, I'm not saying that that's the best way to deal with problems. He believes in Joseph Schumpeter's constructive destruction. And he sized up people quite fast. I can convince you to my side, but if you're still obstreperous, I have no choice but to get rid of people. So he got rid of probably too many people. They were all given marching orders, people in MAS. And when he was interviewed later, he did acknowledge that perhaps it was too many too fast. Okay, he was prepared to acknowledge, because it didn't give the right signal. It was just too drastic. But I think that's how he would, that's his way of approaching problems. He has a long-term plan. He told Mr. Lim Siong Guan, his sperm sac, that, when he, his army, he had, there are different stages of developing the army. He said to Mr. Lim, when I tell the army I want you to move from A to B, plan A to plan B, I actually know where D, E, and F is. But if I were to tell you that the army in E and F is so different from the army now, the boys will say, you're mad. They won't be able to take it. They will say, you're mad. You're crazy. The defense minister's gone insane. But so I tell them baby steps. So from A, I say you go to B, and after B, and we've got our weapons, we go to C. But actually, I already know what D, E, and F is. And what is D, E, and F? He knew that the future army, and the day, I'm not sure when Defense Science Organization was created, that was, he already knew that the state of the state and the art of war then would be intelligence and technology. Okay, so therefore we should not be spending too much money on basic hardware. Okay, we should get sophisticated hardware and intelligence, and it bears out so true today. But you're talking about in the 70s. He already know what armies will be like at stage D, E, and F. How did he know that? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's his analytical mind. I wanted to share a little bit of what I found from your book about Goh Keng Swee's commandments. You said he, like Moses, he had Goh Keng Swee's commandments, and they were never reinvent the wheel, seek the best expert advice always, honesty in thought and action, respect for intellectual rigor, curiosity and creativity, admit to mistakes and learn from them. Now, I would like to ask, is there anything we should add to that list of commandments?
Do the best whatever you do. His first grandson went to see him when he was a young adult and told him, I'm going to do this, I'm doing my MBA, and he just stopped him and said, hang on, Kenny. All you need to do is your first job, whichever it is, just do your very best, and then everything will fall into place. And I think that must have been his axiom too. In Dr. Goh's last interview as a minister, he said, well, I was very lucky. Things came my way, opportunities came my way. And I guess he just tackled them as he sees as deemed fit. And then he's prepared to retire. So I guess I'd like to share that with your listeners. Do the very best you can, and when the situation is a bit hopeless, if you feel that I don't belong to the elite, I come from a lower social class, but you can be a leader with a small L. Not everybody can be a leader with a capital L. I dealt with students when I was with SMU. I in a way mentored them, and in a way told them that there are many things you can do, and all you need to do is actually make a difference in one person's life, and that's actually even good enough. Give free tuition, okay, whatever, because you know the value of a good education and you want it to pass this on. So if you ask me, would Dr. Goh be proud of the army he has created? I say very, very proud. He's always had this belief in young people. It's never belittle them. Always very curious about how they are thinking, what they are thinking. So he would be proud of the young in Singapore. Actually, I have tremendous faith, contrary to what some may think. I think they are a thinking lot, and discerning, and you just hope that they would benefit from the standard of living that Dr. Goh had a part to play in his time.
Last question, any piece of advice for a fresh graduate entering the working world?
Money isn't everything. Learn as much as you can, and you'll probably find that domain knowledge you can pick up. But what working teaches you is EQ, teamwork, how you deal with situations in an office, yeah, how good a leader or a team builder you are. Money will come. Remember the hyphen in the year you are born and the year you die. There's a dash, okay? It is the dash, the years in between. How did you live those years? Did you make a difference to someone's life? Did you sleepwalk through life? Or did you seize all the opportunities that life gave you? Always think of bettering your family, your colleague, like Dr. Goh, you know. His mantra was, how do I make sure that every generation get a higher and higher standard of living? It is their entitlement.
With that, thank you, Siok Sun, for coming on to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, click on the video that's appearing on the screen right now.